All right, good morning. It's Wednesday. It's been a few days since I've made a video, um, but here we are. So, where we left off, Germany, with Austria's help, was in the middle of a two-front war. Over here on the Western Front, they're fighting trench warfare against the French and the British, and over here on the Eastern Front, they're fighting against the Russians. Over here on the Western Front, it's very tough fighting. Many people dying each and every day. Same thing over here on the Eastern Front, but over here, Germany and Austria-Hungary are being really successful and are able to really defeat the Russians day after day and battle after battle. So Germany is having to split their army in two and fight this two-front war. Over here, it's deadlock, stalemate. Neither side's really winning. Over here, though, Germany is having a lot of success. Okay, so Gallipoli was a pretty important battle in the war. It actually takes place over here, kind of in the Middle East, and Turkey and that part of the world. But what's going on here is Russia, like I've said before, Russia was getting whooped, and they're running out of blankets and food and bullets and guns. Like, they're running out of everything they need to fight this war. So Great Britain and France are going to try to establish a trade route so they can help Russia out, give Russia all this stuff. Because if Russia doesn't get all this stuff, they're going to have to surrender. And that would be bad because then, right now, Germany is having to divide its army in half. Well, if Russia surrenders, they could focus and send all of their forces towards the Western Front. So that's what Britain and France are trying to prevent from happening. So Gallipoli was an attempt to get food and supplies and blankets and boots and bullets and guns to Russia to keep them in the fight as long as possible. Okay? So that's what this whole mission called Gallipoli was all about. Unfortunately, it didn't work. Fighting stalls down there as well and turns into trench warfare even down there. So they were hoping for like a quick victory, establish a trade route to Russia. It stalled, led to trench warfare down there. So in the end, they just gave up and focused somewhere else. But that's what it was. It was a major battle of the war. Great idea, but it just didn't end up working out. Okay, so this war really was a true world war. There really was fighting all over the world. If you remember back during imperialism, Europe had colonies all over the world. And this war is going to affect those colonies in Africa and in Asia. So literally there is fighting all over the world. So how does the war affect the colonies? Well, I'm actually going to start down here with number 3. First of all, wherever you had the colonies of the Central Powers, like Germany, let's say way down in Africa, you had a German colony right next to a French colony or right next to an English colony. What do you think those colonies are going to do to each other? They're going to fight. If England and Germany are fighting up here, well, an English colony and a German colony are going to be fighting down there. So that's one way it affected the colonies. Fighting actually broke out amongst the colonies of the two different teams. Central Power colonies fought the Allied power colonies. In other words, German colonies fought French and British colonies all over the world. They would also go down to their colonies to recruit people to help them win the war. They recruited soldiers to come and help fight, and they would help recruit laborers to come and, do the back-breaking labor that war requires, like digging the trenches or digging latrines for men to use the restroom in, or all the labor type things that they didn't want to use soldiers for. So how did they affect the colonies? Recruited colonists to go fight, recruited colonists to go become laborers, and then there was also fighting in the colonies themselves. Now, how would you like it? Let's say you're some guy from India or some guy from, Africa. How would you like to be pulled up into Europe and be forced to fight, lay your life on the line, possibly die in somebody else's war? That would be terrible, wouldn't it? I mean, you'd be like, no, I don't want to do this. But you didn't have a choice, actually. Now, believe it or not, some colonists supported the war, like Gandhi. Gandhi's a famous guy from India, but as a young man during this war, he supported it, and here's why. He was hoping that if India showed that they were loyal to Britain and were willing to help Britain in the war, Britain would later turn around and reward them for being loyal and brave and cooperative, would reward India by giving it its freedom. And apparently Gandhi was under the impression that Britain had made that promise. After the war, Britain is not going to keep that promise, and then that leads to him starting his movement for Indian independence. So anyway, this is how World War I affected the colonies that Europe had around the world. Okay, so we're finally ready to bring the United States of America into this war. But it's a little bit more complicated than World War II. Everybody knows what got us into World War II. They bombed Pearl Harbor. So that's for World War II. It's different for World War I. There's a couple things going on which got us into World War I. The first thing is called unrestricted submarine warfare. And this is something Germany was doing with their submarines. Unrestricted means there was no restrictions on what sort of boat they would blow up. In other words, they would blow up any boat, anytime, anywhere, as long as it was beneficial to them winning the war. And the scary thing about submarine warfare is back then you didn't have the technology where you could know if there were submarines around you. So they're totally hidden, and you think you're all safe, and then you just get blown up by a torpedo. So they would blow up any ship, anytime, anywhere that they wanted to. There was no restrictions. No boat was safe. From a Titanic-like passenger ship to, a little canoe with some fishermen in it. They would blow up any ship, anytime, any place. Okay? And one of the most infamous examples of this was a ship called the Lusitania. And it was 1915 when this is happening. So it was a British passenger ship. So it was like a cruise ship, all right? And there were 128 Americans on it, and the Germans blew it up. And all these civilians died, including these American civilians died. The German excuse was that this passenger ship was carrying military supplies, which in the end ended up being true. So that's why they said they blew it up. But as you can imagine, our president was not too happy that 128 Americans got blown up. And our president was Woodrow Wilson. And he threatened the Kaiser and said, "You'd better stop blowing up random ships without warning. If you don't, the United States of America will get in the war on the team of Britain and France." And, Germany was already fighting a two-front war, and they already had their hands full, and they certainly didn't want America, joining in the fight. So he is going to chill with this unrestricted submarine warfare for at least a couple of years. All right, but just to review, that's when unrestricted submarine warfare, the Germans wanted to end the war as quickly as possible, so they start blowing up any sort of ships, anytime, any place, anywhere. And basically, they're trying to prevent any sort of supplies from getting to their enemies, is what they're trying to do. So, unrestricted submarine warfare. The most infamous example was the Lusitania in 1915. Now, fast forward a couple years, all right? Germany is getting really, really desperate. They've been fighting a two-front war for going on 3 years now, and they can't keep this up much longer. So, they are going to start doing unrestricted submarine warfare again. They were doing it back in 1915. Now they're thinking about doing it in 1917. But they know that if they do this, the United States will enter into the war. So a German diplomat named Zimmerman is going to reach out to Mexico and send Mexico a letter, and basically, or a telegram, and it's basically asking Mexico to join up with Germany, all right, and to fight against the United States. So here's what Germany knows. Germany knows they need to start blowing up ships again. Germany knows that will bring America into the fight. So Germany is trying to get Mexico to attack America to keep them occupied, or just to help Germany defeat America. And if Mexico, in this letter, if Mexico helps and agrees to this, Germany would help Mexico get back basically the American Southwest, with Arizona, New Mexico, parts of California. These are areas that Mexico used to control, that America took from them in wars long ago. So that was what the Zimmerman note was. It was intercepted by the British, so they had their hands on this letter that was going to Mexico. They showed it to America, and that was kind of the last straw. Germany, trying to get our neighbors to the south to go in against us, was just too much for the American president and the American Congress to accept. So, because of unrestricted submarine warfare, Germany blowing up random ships without warning, and because of the Zimmerman note, because of these two things, the United States in 1917, the Congress does declare war on Germany and enters into World War I. Okay, so how did the war affect people back at home, regular citizens back at home? 4 things I want to talk about in this little section. First of all, total war. World War I was one of the first total wars that the United States was involved in, and basically a total war. The textbook definition says it's a war when a nation devotes all of its resources to it. I like to describe it as it's a war where everybody feels it's going on. Recently in American history, we had the war in Iraq, we had a war in Afghanistan, and unless you had a relative or a cousin or an uncle or a mom or a dad or a brother involved in that war, it really didn't affect your everyday life, okay? Because those weren't really total wars. But back in World War I, like, everybody knew, everybody felt it, like it affected everybody, because the government was asking us to make sacrifices to help win this war, and maybe not use as much food or use as much gasoline or use as much metal, things like that. So everybody kind of pitches in, everybody does their part, everybody feels when a total war is going on. It affects everybody's life, okay? So World War I was definitely a total war. So that kind of leads us into rationing. So the government usually, and then during World War I and again during World War II, the government turns to rationing, and that's when they ask us, civilian citizens, non-soldier citizens, they ask us to use less. And if we're using less stuff, that means our military has more to use. So we're cutting back on how much food we eat, how much gas we use, how much metal we use. If we're using less of that stuff, that means our military can use more, and that would give our military a better chance of winning. And I always ask my kids, do you think Americans would be willing to do this today, or loyal enough, or patriotic enough to do this today? Not use as much gasoline, cut back on things just so our soldiers could have a better shot at winning wars. I hope we would be, but I don't know. I just don't know. So anyway, that's rationing. Propaganda. So during World War I, you see a lot of propaganda. So this is one-sided information meant to persuade people. And in this case, it's meant to persuade people that the war is worth fighting. It's meant to persuade men to enlist and do their part. It's meant to persuade women to get out and do their part. And there's all sorts of famous World War I propaganda posters. And I'll take a few pics of some and put it in this video, but the most famous is Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam posters, Uncle Sam wants you. That's World War I propaganda trying to get American young men to sign up and enlist. Before World War I, like, we all know who Uncle Sam is. Like, if I showed you that poster, you'd be like, hey, there's Uncle Sam. But before World War I, no Americans would have known who that guy was. So yeah, Uncle Sam, that's a famous World War I propaganda poster. There's a couple more. There's one in Britain where it's got a father with his young son on his lap, and the young son asking, or it might have been, I can't remember if it was his son or daughter, but hey Dad, what did you do during the Great War? And no dad wants to tell their kid, well, I was a coward and I didn't do anything. So it's trying to guilt British men into, joining the British Army. And then there's another one, and it shows this like monstrous beast, and he's got one of those famous German helmets on. So it's supposed to be a German soldier who they're making out to be a beast. And then he's kidnapped this helpless, beautiful lady, and there's no telling what sort of bad things he's going to do with this lady. So it's making German soldiers out to be beasts who do terrible things to our women, and that would hopefully motivate the guys of that country to go join up so they can defeat the German beasts. So anyway, those are three pretty famous propaganda posters from World War I. And last but not least, women's roles. With all the men, or many of the men, off fighting, women are going to have to go back to work. I know during the Industrial Revolution we talked about women working in the factories. That has cooled off a bunch by World War I. Workers started getting paid more, and workers' rights got better. So over time, the men were making enough money where the women didn't have to work anymore. Well, by World War I, with the men off fighting, women are going to have to start getting back out into the workforce, because with fewer men around, women are going to have to play a larger role in the workforce. And after World War I, I guess sort of as a reward for their effort during the war, women are going to be given the right to vote. So women played a major role in the victory in World War I, and again, they were given the right to vote shortly thereafter. So All right, well, that concludes today's video. Tomorrow we will bring this war to an end, and you'll have another short reading passage to do, which basically kind of reviews everything that today's video and tomorrow's video will go over, and then you'll also have another quiz tomorrow. So hope you have a wonderful Wednesday, and we will see you tomorrow.